if you will believe it. Hallelujah to the Lamb of God. Hallelujah to the King. Now, yes, good is the word of the Lord. Now, I want us to go over to 1 Kings. There's some things I believe the Lord wants me to bring this morning. And I don't even know if what He inspired this with will even be said. But He inspired something, He spoke to me something. And so I spent my day yesterday, most of the day, studying this, listening to God. And so the Lord has a full plate today. And you're going to have to be happy. And you're going to have to be expectant. Because God says, you know, He knows the thoughts He has for you. Thoughts to prosper you. Thoughts of peace. To bring you a future, give you a future, and bring you an expected end. Now, in 1 Kings 19, I want us to see this. So, now, in 1 Kings 19, verse 1, we'll start there. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah. And you know, it was the prophets of Baal and the prophets of the groves is what he's talking about. I don't want somebody that don't study to say, you mean Elijah killed all the prophets? No. These were false prophets. These were prophets that ate meat continually at Jezebel's table. This was the prophets that had been gathered from false gods, idol worshipers. They were the killers of children. They sacrificed babies. They did these things until Ahab, the king of Israel, had built a temple unto Baal. And he had done that for his wife Jezebel. And she had killed the prophets of the Lord. And at this time, and then the prophets started hiding in caves, so many. And there was only a few named prophets moving around during this time. And Elijah was one of the main ones. He was the lead prophet of the time. And so he had called them for a showdown on Mount Carmel. And he called them up. And when they got up to Mount Carmel, it was a battle over a portal that had opened. And Elijah said, we're going to see whose God is God. And he said, you call on Baal or anybody you want to. Build your altar. Put a sacrifice on it. I'll build one. Put a sacrifice on it. Whichever God answers by fire will put no fire under it. Let him light his own sacrifice. Let him send the fire for it. The prophets of Baal couldn't even get a spark. They couldn't get a smoke. They couldn't get anything. The prophets of Baal usually, when they would do this thing, they built funnel fires. They had a funnel up under the altar that you couldn't see, and it had a coal in it. And when they would do their rituals and their chants, they would fan that coal and it would catch up and start burning, and it looked like Baal had came with fire. So Elijah called for a showdown. He said, we're going to see whose God is God. Elijah was totally unreasonable, completely. And when he got on top of Mount Carmel, he was an unreasonable prophet. He got on top of Mount Carmel. He said, we will build the altars here in front of everyone. You can't put a fire under it that way. And so then we're going to see if your God can burn this up. He is the God of lightning and thunder. Surely he can do this. That's what they claimed Baal was. That's why he carried a lightning staff. You saw his depiction on a movie called The Avenger and Loki with the horns and the staff. That's Baal. And so, anyway, of course, no fire came. Elijah said, yell louder. Maybe he's somewhere else. And they said, well, that's good advice. So they started yelling louder. And then they started cutting themselves, trying to offer their blood. So then Elijah built an altar, and with 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, so forth. He dug a ditch around the altar. He called for them to douse the offering with water once, twice, 3 times, so forth. And when he did this, proving there could be no fire under it, he's totally unreasonable in what he's about to do. And so then he prays about a 60-some-odd word prayer, and fire comes out of that portal, burns up the sacrifice, burns up the stone, grows a tongue in front of everybody, and licks up the water around the altar, and leaves nothing but a dark spot on the ground. Everybody started screaming, the Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. Elijah said, take the prophets of Baal, take the prophets of the grove, bring them down here by the brook and slay them all. And he killed 850 men that day. Then we pick up the story right here. So Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, so let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them, those you killed, by tomorrow at this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life. Now he saw a new vision that he didn't see before. This woman, this witch, had put in him a vision he had never seen. He thought for sure everybody's bowing, Israel's bowing. I mean, you got to remember, Elijah has outran the king's chariots back to Jezreel. He's running over 30 miles an hour back to the city. But he stopped at the gate. He stopped at the gate. They went on in. And I'm sure when they went by him, all they can see is everybody dead. And they see the rain come. Because Elijah said, I hear the sound of an abundance of rain. Told Ahab, get down off this mountain lest the rain stop you. So and Elijah says, he picks up his robe, tucks it in his waistband, and he starts running. And he outruns the chariots of the king. And he stops at the gate of Jezreel as they come running in. And I imagine as they went by, they probably said, the Lord, He's the God. The Lord, He's the God. Because they don't want him to do something else. But since he didn't go on in to the gate, then Jezebel had time to craft her words. And she said, you go tell him I'm going to kill him tomorrow about this time. If she could have killed him, she would have done it right then. He was at the gate. But there wasn't a soldier in that army would go out there. They didn't see too many companies of 50 burned up, more burned up. Now the fire burned up. 850 false prophets are dead, all from this one guy wearing camel's hair. They're not about to go out there. So Jezebel knows, just like the devil knows, I've got to get a picture in him that he sees himself being killed. If I can't get him to see it, we've lost it all. So she sent word, and she said this, tomorrow about this time I'm going to kill you like you did the prophets. And Elijah saw it in verse 3. And he arose and went for his life in fear. He came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. So he goes and he stops with his praise at Judah, and he leaves his faith right there, his servant. Then he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. He requested for himself that he might die, and said, it's enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink and laid him down again. The angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink and went in the strength of that meat 40 days. So these angels are fixing him angel food. And he's eating that, and it gives him the strength to go 40 days without anything to eat or drink. Now, and 40 nights, and unto Horeb, the mount of God. And he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down your altars, slain your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. He said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering in of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What doest thou here, Elijah? Now, well, maybe I should go on with that last verse or two. He said, I have been very jealous, verse 14, for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars. He's repeating himself. Did you notice this? Yeah. Slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left. Well, now, he said this now, again. And they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said unto him, Go return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you come unto anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abimaholah shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which has not kissed him. He said, I'm the only one left. He said, I got 7,000 just like you. He said, I still have 7,000 I've reserved to myself. Now, I want you to see this. The Lord woke me up and began to talk to me Friday night, and he said, it is time to run. He said, it's time to run. Now, when God, this is what I want to talk to you about, when God whispers. When God whispers. When God whispers, remarkable things happen. He whispered to Elijah here. Still small voice means he whispered. When God whispers, remarkable things happen. When God whispered to Elijah, he was carried into the future at this moment. He was taken from his dimension through time, and he was moved through time into the future where he met Moses and Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And he stood there, and he heard instruction from the Lord himself. When God whispers, remarkable things take place. Now, a whisper means a soft speech produced without using a full voice. Something uttered very softly or secretly. It's an expressed belief or rumor or a hint. It means to speak with little or no vibration of a vocal cord, especially to avoid being overheard, to speak in secret or secretly. He spoke in a still small voice to Elijah and told him a secret. He said, I'm going to carry you into the future and show you my salvation. And him and Moses met on the Mount of Transfiguration from the same cleft of the rock. This was the cleft that Moses was in when the Lord said, stand by me, and I'll pass by thee and cover you with my hand, and I will show you my hinder parts. He didn't pass by him, he passed through him. And he took his spirit with him as he did Elijah. When God whispers, remarkable things start happening. He starts talking to you about secrets. Secrets that he don't want nobody else to hear. And you have to be able to keep a secret. Let me just go ahead and talk to you for just a minute, just like maybe we're in college for just a minute. In Bible college. Now, in 1973, I remember 1973. I remember bell bottoms. My hair hadn't changed a lot, but I remember the look. I remember Jesus freaks. I still am one of those. And so, even though I was really young during the freakish days, but, you know, the nation was in a shape. It was in what we thought was the worst shape we'd ever seen. Watergate, things like that going on. Roe v. Wade had just been passed to where, for the first time in this nation, the Supreme Court upheld killing unborn children, and now has resulted by this time with enough unborn children slaughtered to fill over 9 Midwestern states in this nation. 40 million worldwide last year. Millions and millions since January of this year worldwide. 3,500 a day in this nation alone. And before the sun goes down, 3,500 more will have died every day. Now, you can watch it as numbers turn on real lifetime, as babies are dying, and it's like this, about this speed right here, as it turns. Now, all of that in 73. Now, something else happened in 73, and I'm just going to say this before I jump on this, okay? Y'all with me? Come on, I know you're looking at me thinking, you know, we was up playing the boogie woogie. We were doing all this stuff, and the pastor had us shouting, and now you're real heavy. Well, I am, but I want to tell you something now. So in 73, I remember hearing, and I don't have all my notes in front of me. I had them, I just didn't bring them. And there was a horse born in 70, I think it was. And no, 71 maybe, something like that. Anyway, he was born, and when he was born, the first thing he did was stand up. They'd never seen something like that. And this horse became something that nobody had ever seen. It had people that didn't bet on racing loved this horse. Everybody loved this horse. And so he was the greatest horse that we've ever had record of ever being born at any time. It ended up he had a heart twice the size physically of any other horse that they had record of. Nobody ever knew how fast he could run because they only let him out one time, just let him go to run, And he beat everything on the racetrack by 31 lengths. He holds the records today that no other horse has even come close to approaching. And I was listening to some of the people who wrote his biography and wrote the jockey's biography and wrote about this horse. And this is what caught my ear. He said, see, on the Kentucky Derby, he comes in, and you're looking at a horse that I believe, had to put down fear. Because the first race he ever had, he had a jockey that couldn't handle him. And he got him mugged when he came out of the gate. And then he got him mugged on the rail, and he's just banging him around till he just backed off, and he didn't run. And so the trainer that trained him threw a chair across the room when he lost and said, this horse should have never, there's not a horse anywhere, he should never lose a race. So they realized what had happened. So from then on, he would start dead last. The gates would open. He'd lay back against the back of the gate like this. They didn't have a girth that would fit him on his saddle. He was too fat. So they had to have a special one made for him. They said, people that in the know said he was the perfect horse from nose to tail. And they said, he was the horse that God made. Said if God made a horse, that's what he intended him to be. He was absolutely perfect. But he would lay back in the gate like this against the back of the gate. And when they'd open the gate for everybody to run, all the horses had run out there, and he'd just come loping out. And he'd run dead last for a long way, and then all of a sudden, he'd just fall out in the outer lane and just blaze by every horse out there and embarrass them all. All the horses watching him go by. Now listen, don't tell me a horse don't know. I've had horses a lot in my life, and I've got some now, but I'm going to tell you something. I have one horse, and Austin knows this horse well, and he grows. He'll grow. Don't take him for granted. He's a full stallion, and he'll grow. He'll grow on you. I took him up to be trained where they train thoroughbreds and where they train Tennessee walkers. Some of these horses were 16, 17 hands high. And I took Trigger in. His back's about this tall. He's not a real big horse, but he's absolutely magnificent in his look. And he was just rippled in muscle. And his daddy was a Tennessee walker, and his mama was a big quarter horse. So he'll bow his head up and he'll prance. When we let him out at that barn up there with all those, we're talking about world champion horses. I'm talking about racking horses, Tennessee walkers. These are world champions, and they're standing there with their tails braided, and they're all bowed up looking at everybody when they come through, and these giant horses. Trigger gets out of that trailer. Took them half a day to load him. When he got out of that trailer to be trained, he walked into that barn. They hooked him up with his halter, bathed him, braided his tail, combed his mane, slicked him down, and then they walked him down to his stall. Well, this is the first time they all got a good look at him. Trigger saw those big thoroughbreds, those big walkers and all, and I'm telling you straight up, he pumped up, and his muscles started rippling. He bowed his head up like that, and he started walking kind of sideways, and I'm telling you what he did. Those walkers, you ever seen a Tennessee walker? He'll stand up, and they put those boots on them where they have to reach out, and they learn to walk like this, Trigger walked by the champions, and when he got near them, he went and stuck his head out like he was a walker. Well, they're all staring at him, backing up. But when he walked by the mares, every one of the mares, the girl horses, stuck their head out of the stall and went. as he went down the line. That's the truth. Isn't that not true? They watched him as he went down that line. And he'd walk. They put him behind this gate about this tall, in his stall. And I told the trainer, I said, he'll get out of there. Oh, no, these big horses, they don't get out of there. He said, he ain't going to get out of there. I said, well, there was this gate. It was about from here to there was a pickup. So he walked outside. When he walked back in, Trigger was standing between the gate and the pickup, looking around at him. The trainer was scared of him. The horses were scared of him. He was too smart. He absolutely, listen, he knows. I was working on a corral one day with a hammer and nail. And he'll come over behind me, and he'll stick his nose right down to the hammer and watch it. And one day I just stood up and I said, here, Trigger, hold this. And I handed him the hammer by the handle. He just bit it with his mouth and stood there and held it for me. That's the truth. That's all it's true. And so he's amazing. He's an amazing horse. He's not mean. He just ain't never been rode. And so they know. Well, they talked about this other horse I'm talking about. And they kept talking about him. And I listened to the experts talk about him. They said his owner, Penny Chinnery, said, this was her words, she said, the greatest thing about him was his eye. Said, and then the others started talking about him. They said he would walk down the line and he'd look at the stands as he went by and he'd single people out and look at them. And then he'd look back, they said every time a camera flashed, he'd stop and pose and look at it. Turn his head and look at it. And what really got you was they said, the guy that did the biography said, I watched him watch an airplane fly over one day. I don't know if you know anything about a horse, but he stopped and watched an airplane as it went over and watched it. You ever seen a horse watch an airplane fly? Well, this horse was like that. And so he won the Kentucky Derby by a couple lengths or so. Then they're looking at him for the Triple Crown in 73. He has to win the Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont. So and each race is harder and longer. Well, it hadn't been done in 25 years since Citation won it. And before that, it was Man of War when Israel became a nation in 48. So here they take him in the Kentucky Derby. He's laying in the thing. He wins the race. They take him to the Preakness. It's got tight turns in the Preakness. And this horse is used to going way out and just exploding. So they got to the Preakness. It's longer. He did the same thing, laid on the back of the gate. All the horses went out, then he comes out. Then suddenly after the first turn, he just blazes by them. The people are screaming, you're going to kill the horse, you're going to kill the horse. Don't you know you got him going too fast, too fast, too fast. You're going to kill this horse. And everybody was just talking about it. So what is this jockey doing? What does he mean? The jockey didn't have a lot to do with it. When he made this one turn, the jockey just kind of made his hand just like you would fix your cuff. And he hit that outside lane and he was gone. He outrun them all. Well, now they're wondering what he's going to do in the Belmont. That's the last. He wins that, he's got the Triple Crown. So they take him out, and it's a long race. Now, what is it, 2 miles? Something like that. It's big, it's long. Whatever it is, it's long, and it was the graveyard of fast horses because they had no stamina. But nobody knew he had a heart twice his size of a normal horse. So can you imagine the oxygen he was assimilating? And he had a reach longer than Man of War. His stretch was way longer. And so he comes, they put him in the Belmont. This other horse had beat him when he had an abscess on his gum. And he knew it. And they said if he lost a race, he'd go to the back of his stall and just sit against the back of his stall and just drop his head on the ground and stare. Couldn't stand it that he lost, but he had a big sore on his mouth. And they said he ate enough for 2 pregnant mares. He's just a big horse. So they take him out, and this horse had beat him. So when they put him in the... Now watch this close. He's going out to the Belmont Stakes. I know you didn't come here to hear a racing story, but I'm headed somewhere. You ought to hear the men talk about him. He had a human quality almost to him. Watch airplanes. He would look around and notice you. And he would pose for pictures. He ran in the Preakness, I think, every quarter and all the quarters, 5 quarters, whatever it was, he ran, or in the Belmont he did it, ran every quarter faster than the one before. It's never been done before. I mean, you're talking about running all out. So he's headed out there that morning. This is his morning to win the Triple Crown if he makes it. On his way out there, his biographer says this, and if you watch his eyes when he tells it, he said, I approached him. His name was Secretariat. He said his real name was Red, but the jockey club wouldn't let him race under Red, so they had to have a fancy name, so it was Secretariat. And so he said, I walked out to him and I watched him. He said everybody was anticipating. It was 6 a.m. people piled into the Belmont stadiums. He said, I fell asleep against a tree in front of his barn all night. Slept all night. He said when he came out that morning, he said all at once, he said this girl rattled a bucket. He's walking along with Eddie, his handler. And all of a sudden, he said his eyes were about this big and his nostrils were flared. And he stood up on his hind legs like that and started walking on 2 feet down through the aisle. And he said, this is what the biographer said. He said, my God, what are we going to see today? At that point, something changed in that horse. I was listening to the Lord, and the Lord told me, he said, I whispered to him right there. He said, that's when I whispered to him. And some of the words I'll be using actually runs its reference to a running horse in the whisper of God. He whispered to that horse, and it fired him up to no ends. And when he ran, and when that gate sounded at the Belmont, he didn't come out dead last. He leaped out of that front gate, and he challenged for the lead from the get-go. And he ran every quarter mile faster than the other. And they said, you're going to kill him. You're going to break him down. The horse is going to die. He's running too fast, over 30-something miles an hour. He's not going to make it. There's no way he can hold this pace. And then all at once, the other horses started fading back. And he just kept moving, kept driving, kept driving. And then all they could say was, he's 2 lengths, he's 10 lengths, he's 15, he's 18, he's 22 lengths ahead. The jockey said, all I could do, he said, I just couldn't resist it. Right before I crossed the wire, I turned and looked back, and they got a picture of him looking at everybody else. They're way back there. And he wasn't hitting him. He just dropped it and let him run. And he started running. And he ran that race and beat every horse there by 31 lengths. Man of War couldn't do that. Citation couldn't do that. And you ought to hear these people talk. These are very important people, news channels. They said something was supernatural, spiritual about this horse. He said, I watched him that day. And he said, you could tell it was as if God whispered to him. And he said he said there was a supernatural experience. He said one of them said, I swear, I promise you, when he came down the line, there all the co-eds were standing up on the rail, and said half of them were crying. Jack Nicklaus sent in the golfer. Jack Nicklaus told Haywood, the guy from ABC, I think it is, he said, you were there. Yes, I was there. He said, I was in my own living room watching. And when he came down the stretch, I started applauding. I started clapping. I started crying. Jack Nicklaus said that. And Haywood said, don't you understand, Jack? Said, all your life you've looked for perfection in your sport, and you saw it that day. And I listened to the two jockeys talk later. The one who won the Triple Crown on Citation, the one who won it on Secretariat. And they were on one show. And they were talking. And the guy at Citation said, I don't know. He said, there's no way of telling who would have won unless we could have ran them. He said, but I will tell you this. On that day at the Belmont, this is the rider who had won the Triple Crown 3 times, I think. Twice or 3 times. He said, there isn't a horse anywhere could have beat him that day. Because, see, the Spirit of God whispered in his ear. And when he whispered, his destiny became alive inside him. And he walked on 2 legs like a man as he came down through the aisle. Now, I'm talking to you about something that men don't know much about because they're too corrupted, for the most part, to hear the whisper of God. Elijah gets to the mount, to the cleft in the rock, and God whispers to him. And when he whispered to him, he carried him forward in time to the Mount of Transfiguration, where he met the Christ. And everything about Moses' teaching came alive to him that day. Elijah goes back to his prospective time, and he's parting water. He's calling down fire. He's doing things he's never done before.